The food crisis is increasing day by day in Venezuela. Is increasingly difficult to ensure people's daily lives. Due to the economic crisis in the country, milk, flour, not achieved basic nutrients to the shelves in stores like eggs waiting empty. Still rice, we could not find anything to feed our children like pasta oil. How can this be? Why are we and these foods not given us any information about where to find what we will? Queues too long, we have seen one like this before. The worst thing, we cannot find even milk for the baby. The majority owner of Venezuela's economy into the world's largest reserves consists of income derived from petroleum. However, falling oil prices have severely crippled the country's economy. 2014 oil price per barrel or over $100, while today, the lowest level in 12 years, the price per barrel sold as $49. Country GDP in 2014 to 3.9, in 2015 to 5.7% base declined. Cone industry, a number of companies, which in 1999 supplied 13,000 compared to 2016, fell by 4,000. If the inflation rate, according to the Central Bank of Venezuela, has climbed 141% to 180% in 2015 to 2014. In countries that are facing food crises almost every day, experienced looting and violence will threaten the security, causing social unrest is increasingly growing. Venezuelan Observatory of Social Conflict in the area reported that there were 107 violent incidents in the first quarter of this year. The opposition argues that the food shortages caused by the country Maduro signed a failed monetary policy. Almost no longer in charge of the lack of financial provision of a currency seize power. Electricity crisis is not a simple weather event, it is considered as an economic failure. Democratic Union of the opinion that the panel should not be sought outside of the respondents' political crisis going on. Maduro called for a referendum to abandon the mission in the country. The rumor was there would be chicken. Word had spread that a delivery of poultry meat was due at the Central Madiran supermarket, and long before dawn a queue of shoppers was snaking around the block. Katya Alonso was one of them. The 48-year-old mother of 3 was already planning to make the traditional chicken and rice dish arroz con pollo if she could also find some rice. I haven't been able to buy chicken in more than a month, so I was there early at about 4 am, she said. At about 6:30, 2 trucks finally drew up outside the store, but before the drivers could start to unload, National Guardsmen told them to drive on. Venezuelans on the food and economic crisis blighting their daily lives. Read more. Venezuela is rich in oil, but dogged by chronic shortages of basic goods and essential medicines, electricity and water rationing, spiraling inflation and rampant crime. Perhaps it was not surprising that the mood outside the supermarket quickly turned ugly, frustration turned to despair, anger to violence. Before long, the incident on Tuesday had escalated. Mobs tried to loot several bakeries and delis and another food delivery truck. The unrest soon spread throughout this city of 200,000 just outside the capital, Caracas. Protesters shouted "We want food" as they blocked intersections with burning tires and clashed with security forces. Police and the National Guard quickly controlled the outburst, with some 14 people reportedly arrested, and at least 1 person was injured, according to witnesses. The protests were not related to marches in Caracas and other major cities, which were called this week by opposition leaders seeking to cut short the term of President Nicolas Maduro, who they say has driven the country into the ground through mismanagement. But spontaneous outbursts such as the one in Guarenas may present a more serious challenge to Maduro's rule than any efforts by his political rivals. Venezuelans have been living with shortages of food and essential items for nearly 3 years as the oil-dependent economy began to buckle. And patience is wearing thin. The Venezuelan Observatory of Social Conflict registered 2,138 protests between January and April, most of them spontaneous manifestations of anger or frustration. Incidents of looting have nearly quadrupled in the same time. There is nothing left to sell. If you really wanted to buy food, you should have started queuing at 2 in the morning, yells one of the military men. That is the people's food, an angry mother of 4 retorts. People are losing patience, we are all tired. Snaking queues for scarce staples are a common sight across Venezuela and looting is becoming routine. This poses the biggest risk to Nicolas Maduro, the socialist president. The situation is very, very critical, says Marianela Herrera, a professor of food and nutritional public policy at the Central University of Venezuela, who also runs Fundación Bengoa, a watchdog dealing with issues around nutrition. The anguish when it comes to acquiring food is gigantic and generates violence. Only days before the supermarket showdown, hundreds of people had broken into the wholesale market next door, which had been guarded by paratroopers in red berets. Eyewitnesses say there was a stampede, with people rushing to get their hands on packs of rice, sugar, and cornmeal flour. Mr. Salazar opens the fridge at his household of 6 to the Financial Times. Its only contents are a handful of mangoes picked from a nearby tree and plastic bottles filled with tap water. Next to it, a bucket contains half a kilogram of black beans, half a kilogram of dried pasta and 1 kilogram of maize flour, that's all for the week. Hampered by nationalizations along with price and currency controls, food production continues to plummet, says Venezuela's Chamber of Food Industries. Ms. Herrera of the Central University of Venezuela, says, the economic system that rules here has severely hit food production. That is compatible with a situation of hunger. Furthermore, Venezuela is set to continue to squeeze imports due to depressed prices of oil, which account for 95% of export earnings. The country's economics czar recently told Bloomberg that imports would fall to about $20 BN this year from $37 BN in 2015. We're going to maintain this level of restriction to force the productive sector of the economy to increase output. Hopefully we could cut imports to as low as $15 BN. The adjustment program posed by Perez Abbott is of high risk, economically and socially. Socially, it is a time bomb, and if it explodes, there is no way to know the path the country will take, wrote Carlos Miguel Alvarez and Asdrubal Olivares at Ecoanalytica, an economic and financial consultancy based in Caracas. The move may be aimed at preserving hard currency and paying bondholders, but against the background of a dire recession, near hyperinflation and barren shelves, 85% of Venezuelans do not trust the government to handle the situation, and blame officials for the current crisis, say local pollsters. With 96% of Venezuelans identifying food scarcity as their principal problem, a move to further shrink Polar's production capacity could become a problem for Mr. Maduro. According to Dataanalysis, a pollster, food shortages in Caracas reached 83% in April. Dataanalysis adds that Polar can produce 5 times more food with the same amount of money than Venezuela's food ministry, which did not reply to requests for comment. Nomura adds that low inventories at Polar are threatening production of the staple cornmeal flour at the end of May. The food crisis comes as tension and unrest grows due to the opposition's push for a recall vote to remove Mr. Maduro. While sitting and former regional presidents and the U.S. are calling for dialogue between opposing camps, shortages could spark a social explosion that may lead to his violent ouster. José Ramón Arias, an opposition legislator in Maracay, feels hunger is double-edged. There is looting every day here, but the capacity for mobilizing people has diminished. The people now face the dilemma of taking to the streets to demand change or spending their days queuing in order to feed their families. In a speech to supporters in the capital Caracas, he said the country had to recover the means of production, to counter its deep economic crisis. On Friday, he introduced a new, nationwide state of emergency. Opposition protesters have been rallying in Caracas to push for a recall vote to eject him from power. Mr. Maduro said the state of emergency was needed to combat foreign aggression, which he blamed for Venezuela's problems. And he said military exercises would take place next weekend to counter foreign threats. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, but its economy has been severely hit by falling global oil prices. Its economy contracted by 5.7% last year, and its official inflation rate is estimated to be topping 180%. There are severe shortages of food, medicines, and basic goods which Mr. Maduro argues are due to business leaders and the US waging an economic war against his government. The economic crisis that started 3 years ago has deepened this year, to the point that it has affected immensely the day-to-day life of every Venezuelan. On top of having to queue for hours every week to be able to buy the basic products, now Venezuelans have to cope with energy and water rationing almost daily. This, in a country that used to be one of the most developed nations in Latin America, with the highest consumption rates in the region. Venezuelans have lost interest in Mr. Maduro's moves because of the economic crisis. The latest, like the state of emergency decree or the occupation of certain plants, are in fact already happening and have changed little for Venezuelans' daily lives. In an address to the nation, he said the measures would be in place for 3 months but would likely be extended over 2017. He did not specify if there would be limits to other constitutional rights, but he said the decree would provide a fuller, more comprehensive protection for our people. A previous state of emergency was implemented in states near the Colombian border last year. It suspended constitutional guarantees in those areas but did not suspend guarantees related to human rights. The Venezuelan Minister for Communication and Information, Luis José Marcano, said the state of emergency would allow the government more resources to distribute food, basic goods, and medicines. But he added that it also created mechanisms for the security forces to be able to guarantee public order needed because of the threats by armed groups, difficult to ensure people's daily lives. Due to the economic crisis in the country, milk, flour, not achieved basic nutrients to the shelves in stores like eggs waiting empty. Still rice, we could not find anything to feed our children like pasta oil. How can this be? Why are we? And these foods have severely crippled the country's economy. 2014 oil price per barrel or over $100, while today, the lowest level in 12 years, the price per barrel sold as $49. Country GDP in 2014 to 3.9 in 2015 to 5.7% base. The food crisis is increasing day by day in Venezuela is increasingly not given us any information about where to find what we will. Queues too long, we have seen one like this before. The worst thing, we cannot find even milk for the baby. The majority owner of Venezuela's economy into the world's largest reserves consists of income derived from petroleum. However, falling oil prices has declined. Industry, a number of companies, which in 1999 supplied 13,000 compared to 2016, fell by 4,000. If the inflation rate, according to the Central Bank of Venezuela, has climbed 141% to 180% in 2015 to 2015,